It is time to hunt the white whale. Moby Dick. I'm sorry, I can't do that voice the entire time. But Moby Dick is a film that came out in 1956. It's based on the Herman Melville novel of the same name. And if your goal is to adapt this brick of a book into a 2-hour movie, you've got your work cut out for you. But that being said, this is not the first or last time anyone tried to adapt Moby Dick into a live-action film. They tried it once in the silent era and then tried it multiple times since 1956. But it's the 1956 version that we're talking about today, and for better or worse, this is the version that everybody thinks of when they think of a Moby Dick film, and I think a lot of that has to do with the casting. But let's start at the beginning, where we're first introduced to Ishmael, played by Richard Basehart, and he does a pretty good job at being our audience point of view character. He enters the strange world of whaling because he's restless and wants to go out to sea, and we pretty much see everything on the ship through his eyes. And while Basehart's Ishmael is not the most interesting portrayal of Ishmael that's been on the screen, he does serve his job well in kind of introducing us to Nantucket and the Pequod and so on and so on. And that brings us to the first stop in our adventure, where Ishmael spends the night at the Spouter Inn, and it's here where he meets his unlikely bedfellow and future best friend Queequeg. And as bland and basic as Ishmael's character is, Queequeg is the exact opposite. He's a cannibal, pagan, whaler, harpooner, and he is just, look at him, like he's covered in tattoos, and he's the prince of some Pacific island that we've never heard of that's probably fictional. And all this is explored a lot more in the book, and unfortunately most of it gets left on the cutting room floor in this version. And it's such a shame because the book does such a great job at developing Queequeg's character past the basic savage Native American type that you might assume at first glance. And while Friedrich von Ledberg, I hope I pronounced that right, did a great job at bringing this character to life, they really undercut it by cutting out a lot of his backstory, and also the fact that you have this German guy playing a cannibal who's from a Pacific island, and that's a little too whitewashy for my taste, especially when you have such a diverse crew on the Pequod. You have all the harpooners, which are different races, and they are played by actors of different races. There's no whitewashing there. But for Queequeg, I think that's just a missed opportunity, especially when a lot of his backstory is not included, but you're trying to cram that brick of a book into 2 hours, and things gotta go fast. And things do move pretty fast. Queequeg and Ishmael spend the night together at the inn, and then boom, cut to the next day. It's Sunday, everyone's going to church, and you have Orson Welles as Father Mapple giving a sermon on Jonah. And just like in the book, the pulpit is made out of the front of a ship. You have memorials of all the people that were lost at sea or presumed dead at sea to keep their spirits alive. And you have all the widows of those dead sailors sitting in the pews praying, engaging with the service. And it's a really good scene and very accurately depicts the visuals that are described in the book. And this is something that this movie does very well. Even though it's a very abridged version of the tale, the visuals that this movie brings, especially for 1956, are incredible. From the tattooing on Queequeg's body to the chapel that we just talked about, to the Pequod itself that's half made of wood and half made of whalebone, and even the appearance of Ahab. All these visual elements are very faithfully and accurately adapted from the source material, and I can appreciate that. But moving right along, they do find the Pequod, and like I said, it's made out of half whalebone and half timber. You can tell that this ship is a character in itself. It's unlike any of the other ships, and you have this uneasy feeling that somehow this ship may not come back alive and that it's monstrous and deformed. But regardless, Ishmael and Queequeg have a nice chat with the ship's owners, and they decide to sign on as part of the ship's crew, even though they've never seen Ahab yet. They've heard of him plenty. They know that he's scarred from his encounter with a whale, that he's a cripple, he's got this peg leg made of whalebone, while also alluding to the madness that his name implies, Ahab, the king of Israel that was just a terrible king, and that same madness that will become a lot more relevant as the whale approaches towards the end. And the next day they're shipping out with the Pequod, about to go on a grand adventure. You meet the first and second mates, Starbuck and Stubb, played by Leo Glenn and Harry Andrews respectively, and they do a good job bringing their characters to life. Starbuck is probably the most level-headed, reasonable, and responsible person on board. He's just in it for the money. He really doesn't care about this whole revenge quest. He wants to make it back home to his wife and kids and sell the oil so that he can live comfortably like any responsible person. And then you have Stubb, who really doesn't care one way or another about the oil or the revenge. He's just in it for the adventure. He's hot-tempered, but also jovial. He will joke around, he'll yell at you, but it'll all be in good fun. And it's not till things start getting really serious towards the end where you see that smile start to fade from his face. But now let's talk about the captain himself, who hasn't revealed his face yet for some time. He was there the day they shipped out, but he was locked away in his cabin, and for many days after, he still refused to show his face until one fateful day when Ahab emerged from his cabin and you see him in all of his Gregory Peck glory. And it's amazing how an actor can be so well known for playing probably the most kind-hearted, loving, affectionate father ever put to film in the role of Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, and then turn a 180 and play Ahab, who, while he is charismatic enough to get the crew on his side and encourage them and rally them, he's still clearly insane and definitely the villain of this tale, because he is so blinded by his vengeance that he'll risk everything, especially the safety of the crew, in the pursuit of him. And Peck's Ahab is everything you would want in an Ahab. He's grim and gruff and stoic. The book makes a point to compare his wrinkled brow to that of iron because it's so unmoving and so set in its way. And I don't know if this is a credit to Peck or the makeup team or both, but they nailed it on Ahab's face. You look at Ahab and that is the Ahab of the book, without a doubt. And it's here where the movie kind of slows down a little bit. After Ahab gives his grand speech about hunting the white whale and the true mission of this voyage, and he brings out the doubloon and nails it to the mast, this is where you really start to feel the abridging of this book, because the middle section of Moby Dick is pretty monotonous. There's a lot of talk about whales and the science of them and the processes of melting it into the oil and so on and so on, and it's really boring. But at the same time, you feel like you're learning a lot as you read it, and it makes this whole fantasy voyage that really could never exist. I mean, the white whale doesn't exist, it's a fantasy. But it makes everything feel a bit more realistic and a bit more authentic because it goes to the minutia of everything on that boat. And in the movie, you get a little of it. You see the processes in kind of a montage, but you really don't understand any of it. It doesn't break it down. Ishmael's voiceover really doesn't tell you anything you couldn't have figured out from just watching it. And I do think something gets lost, because if you look at Jaws, now, I know Jaws was heavily inspired by Moby Dick. I used Moby Dick quotes in my review of Jaws last week. Jaws uses the day-to-day monotony of the island to its advantage to create suspense and dread and knowledge of sharks, and specifically Bruce the shark from Jaws. So I don't see why Moby Dick couldn't do the same thing with the day-to-day operations of the boat to create that suspense, the dread, everything that they're doing, they intend to do to Moby Dick. So I don't know, I think they could have really used that, but alas, it's only a 2-hour movie, so they really had to get to the point and get to the action. And there are a couple of exciting whale hunting sequences before they actually get to Moby Dick, so you do see a bit of the whale action described in the book, but it's here where everything's a little out of order. It doesn't follow the narrative of the book as one-to-one as it did previously. It's here where certain events in the books, like coming across friendly ships, asking if they've seen the white whale, hunting whales, processing it, Queequeg getting sick and thinking that he's going to die, and so he crafts this coffin that will become relevant in the end, but for now is just more of an omen. That whole thing gets played out in about 10 minutes or so. But even though all these events fly by pretty fast, and they're definitely not in the same order that they were in the book, it doesn't really hurt the movie because you still see it and all the impact is still there for the most part, except for Queequeg's coffin. I'll get back to that in a little bit. But for a lot of the movie, it's your fun whaling adventure with sea shanties and monologues given by the amazing Gregory Peck Ahab. Seriously, I can't say this enough. Gregory Peck's Ahab is by far the best character in this movie from a writing perspective, an acting perspective, a translation from page to screen perspective. It's amazing. Whenever he's on screen, he just knocks it out of the park. But now let's talk about Queequeg's coffin and the part where he thinks he's dying. So Queequeg gets sick, he thinks he's dying, he can feel the touch of death coming over him, and he orders the carpenter to make him a coffin, and he gets it made, but then Queequeg recovers, and now he has no use for the coffin, so they just make it into a life buoy and strap it to the boat. And all that is a pretty accurate translation from the book to the movie, and it all seems to be there, except when Queequeg is falling ill, the brotherly relationship that Queequeg and Ishmael have throughout this entire voyage is somehow missing from this adaptation. You would think that the most important thing to get right is Queequeg and Ishmael. They're the people that go on this adventure together. They're kind of our eyes and ears into the world of whaling. But you would think that that bond would be the thing that really cements them as a unit and makes us care about what happens to this boat. And you really don't. I think part of it is because they wanted to get them on the boat as fast as possible because, again, short runtime. So they kind of had to speed through their introductions and their friendship so that they could get on the boat. But once they're on the boat, Captain Ahab is the star of the show now, and Starbuck and Stubb. And it's their relationships that really drive the narrative in this adaptation, where you see Starbuck, who's the more level-headed one, go toe-to-toe with Ahab a number of occasions because their ideologies just don't mix. And while that's a big part of the book too, the stuff with Queequeg and Ishmael, arguably the more relatable characters in the story, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And it becomes really apparent when Queequeg falls ill and Ishmael is like, oh no, my brother's dying. But you really don't feel it because it hasn't had the time to be established earlier. So I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh on it, but for me it just kind of fell a little flat. But after Queequeg recovers, we move right on to the third act, and Ahab's madness is growing. He's becoming more frustrated. He's trying to find this white whale, and then they find it, and they give it chase for one night, but he gets away. They find him a little bit later, and the hunt is on. They lower the boats, they go in, and this finale is incredible. It's great, especially for the time period. The special effects of 1956 were not all that special. They use a lot of rear projection and miniatures and compositing to really give this effect of the battle and the size of Moby Dick himself. And I just realized I haven't really talked about the whale that much, which is weird since he is the title character after all. But just like the shark in Jaws, you don't really see the whale that much. And that's intentional. Herman Melville, when he wrote the book, saved any encounter with the whale until the very end when they end up hunting him. But the reason why this works in both the book and the film is the same reason why it works in Jaws, because you have all this build-up, you have people talking about it. You see how the perceived presence of the whale, even though it's not the physical presence of the whale, affects their psyches, it affects their attitudes and the dread in leading up to that. It's a really good storytelling technique so that when you do see the whale in the third act, it becomes even more impressive than you could ever imagine. And the whale in this movie looks just about as realistic as the shark in the first Jaws movie, so that's pretty darn good for the time. It's obviously a miniature that got composited into the scene, but they have the whiteness of the whale down, they have the harpoon sticking out of its back, they have the wrinkled brow. They don't really include the crooked jaw in the design, which I think is a little disappointing, but everything else about the whale looks awesome. So they're fighting this white whale, it's exciting, there's water rushing over everybody, everyone's drenched, boats are overturning, Ahab climbs up, grapples with the whale, and from hell's heart he stabs at thee, and Ahab ends up dying just like in the book. He's stabbing the whale, it goes under, he comes back up, he's all tangled in the harpoon ropes, and his arm is flapping in the breeze just like in the book, almost beckoning them to hunt the whale further. And it's so incredible to see that visually on film, because you read it in the book and you have such a clear picture of what that could look like. And when you see it there and it's realized and it's accurate, your jaw hits the floor and you're like, yes, that is Ahab tethered to the whale with the arm flailing. And they nailed it. And it's here where Starbuck snaps. He tells everyone to keep hunting that whale, and the whale attacks all the boats. It attacks the Pequod, it rams right into it, and the boat sinks with only Ishmael left alive to tell the tale, clutching to Queequeg's coffin. The coffin that was destined for his best friend, his brother, and now in Queequeg's death, Ishmael can live. Do you see why it's so important to get that relationship right in the beginning of the movie? That is the emotional through line for this entire story. It's the story of Ishmael and Queequeg, these two unlikely people that became brothers that faced trials and tribulations and whales and Ahabs. That does end in tragedy, but the only survivor is Ishmael and Queequeg's coffin. But that's pretty much the end of Moby Dick. Ishmael does get picked up by the Rachel, which is a friendly ship that takes him back to shore, so he did survive. But I'm honestly not quite sure how I feel about this movie. I love the book. I mean, it's a classic of American literature for a reason. And I honestly couldn't tell you how you could do that book justice. It's incredibly long. and deep and detailed and monotonous, but this 56 version definitely gave it a shot. And even though the relationship between Queequeg and Ishmael kind of fell flat, the representations of Ahab and his mates and the visual style of everything from the whale to the ship to the chapel in the beginning of the movie, it all very accurately depicts what Melville describes in the book. So by all accounts, it really is a good adaptation, but I can't say it's a great adaptation because it cut out so much to fit that 2-hour runtime. And what I would consider one of the most important aspects, the relationship between Queequeg and Ishmael, was kind of left on the cutting room floor. But now I leave it to you guys. Comment below, what do you think about Moby Dick? Is there another version that you think is better that I should check out? Whatever you think, comment below. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.